A millionaire arrives at a farm to collect overdue rent when he hears desperate crying coming from the pigsty. As he approaches, he finds a sight that paralyzes him. A sick six-year-old girl is chained alongside the pigs, trembling with fear and hunger. When he asks why she's there, the child's innocent answer completely devastates him and makes him explode with rage against the farmer. What he does in the next few seconds leaves everyone in shock. The suffocating morning heat already foretold another scorching day in the rural heartland. Robert Miller adjusted the air conditioning in his black Mercedes and watched the dirt road stretch out ahead, raising a reddish cloud of dust. At 52, he had built an agribusiness empire that few dared to challenge. His reputation as a fair but ruthless man in business preceded him throughout the region. That morning, however, something different weighed on his chest. Perhaps it was the memory of the previous night's phone call, when his daughter had once again cancelled their Sunday brunch, claiming unavoidable commitments in New York City. Or perhaps it was simply the exhaustion of a lifetime dedicated to acquiring properties and accumulating wealth, always hoping it would fill the void that grew silently in his soul. He slowed down as he spotted the weathered wooden gate of Willow Creek Farm. 3 months. 3 months without receiving rent from Jim Peterson, a farmer Robert had known for over a decade. At first, he had given him the benefit of the doubt. Everyone fell on hard times eventually, but patience had its limits, even for someone who understood the grind of country living. He parked near the main house, a simple, exposed brick structure that had seen better days. The silence was broken only by the distant mooing of cattle and the persistent buzz of insects. Robert stepped out of the car, immediately feeling the contrast between the chilled air of the vehicle and the humid heat that enveloped the property like a heavy blanket. "Jim!" he called out, clapping his hands loudly. "Jim Peterson!" A thin figure emerged from the shadow of the porch. Jim looked as though he had aged years in just a few months. His clothes were dirty, his hair disheveled, and there was something in his eyes Robert couldn't quite decipher. Nervousness, guilt, or something darker. "Mr. Miller," Jim said, descending the steps with hesitant movements. "What a surprise." Surprise? Robert maintained a professional tone, though he already felt the tension in the air. "Jim, it's been 3 months. 3 months without a dime of rent. You don't answer my calls. You don't respond to my messages. I came personally because I had no alternative." Jim averted his gaze, fixing it on the packed dirt ground. "Things have been tough, Mr. Miller, very tough. Last year's drought, prices being down. You know how it is." "I do know how it is, yes. But I also know that agreements need to be honored." Robert crossed his arms, his voice gaining the firmness he usually reserved for important negotiations. "I didn't come here to cause trouble, Jim. I came for a solution. Do you have the money or not?" The farmer ran a hand over his face, letting out a heavy sigh. "I don't have it all, no. But if you give me 1 more month, I guarantee I can." 1 month. Robert shook his head. "Jim, you've already told me that twice. I need concrete guarantees, or we're going to have to discuss other alternatives." It was then that a sound cut through the air like a sharp blade, a cry. Childish, desperate, coming from somewhere near the pigsty. Robert stopped speaking mid-sentence, turning his head toward the sound. Jim visibly paled, his eyes widening in a way that made Robert's heart quicken. "What's that crying?" Robert asked, already taking a step toward the sound. "It's nothing," Jim said quickly, blocking his path. "Must be an animal. You know how it is, critters make strange noises sometimes." But Robert wasn't a man to be easily fooled. That wasn't an animal sound. It was a human cry, a child's cry. And there was something in Jim's reaction that instantly activated all of Robert's protective instincts. The crying sounded again, fainter, Now, but still clearly audible, Robert felt something cold slither down his spine. "Jim," he said, his voice low but charged with an authority that made the farmer step back. "What child is that crying?" Robert didn't wait for an answer. He bypassed Jim with determination, ignoring the farmer's protests, and walked toward the pigsty. The stench intensified with each step, a nauseating mix of animal waste, fermented mud, and something else he couldn't quite identify. The crying had stopped, but that only heightened his urgency. "Mr. Miller, please," Jim shouted behind him, his voice laden with desperation. "Don't go in there. I'll explain everything. I swear I will." But Robert had already seen. In the farthest corner of the pigsty, amidst the dark mud and the nervously stirring pigs, was a small, fragile figure. A girl, approximately 6 years old, her clothes torn and caked with mud, sat with her back against the rotting wooden fence. Around her left ankle, a rusty chain fastened her to a stake driven into the ground. The world stopped. Robert felt as if someone had sucked all the air from his lungs. His knees almost buckled as the reality of what he was seeing crystallized in his mind. The girl was visibly ill, her pale skin contrasting with the dirt smudges. She limped when she tried to move away from the pigs, and Robert could see the red wounds around her ankle where the chain had cut into her delicate skin. "My God," he murmured, his voice coming out as a strangled whisper. "Oh my God." The girl looked up when she heard his voice. Her eyes were brown, too large for her thin face, filled with a sadness no child should ever carry. When she saw him, she tried to hide even further against the fence, as if expecting more punishment. "Hi," Robert said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the fury that was beginning to simmer in his veins. He approached slowly, as he would a wounded animal. "Hi, little one. What's your name?" The girl watched him for a long moment before answering in a voice so low he had to lean in to hear, "Lily." "Lily," Robert repeated, kneeling in the mud. Without caring about his expensive clothes. "Lily, why are you here? Who did this to you?" Tears began to stream down the girl's dirty face. "My tummy was so hungry," she said, her voice breaking. "And Grandma didn't have anything to cook. I asked the farmer for help, but he wouldn't help me. So I tried to get a chicken, but I promise I'll be a good girl and won't do it anymore." Every word was like a punch to Robert's gut. This child had been chained like an animal because she had the audacity to try and get food when she was hungry. His mind struggled to process the absolute cruelty of the situation. "Are you hurt?" he asked, noticing how she favored one leg. Lily nodded timidly. "The chain cuts, and I'm coughing a lot." Robert turned slowly, his fury transforming into something far more dangerous, a cold, controlled rage he rarely felt. Jim stood a few feet away, his hands visibly trembling. "Jim," Robert said, his voice low but loaded with a threat that made the farmer recoil, "you chained a 6-year-old child up with the pigs?" "She's a thief," Jim protested, but his voice sounded desperate. "She trespassed on my property, tried to steal my chicken." Robert rose slowly, mud covering his knees, but he cared about nothing beyond the trembling girl behind him. "A hungry child asked for help, and you punished her as if she were an animal." "Mr. Miller, you don't understand," Jim began. "I understand perfectly." Robert took a step toward the farmer. "I understand that you're a monster." The conversation was interrupted by a fit of coughing from the girl, a dry, painful cough that made Robert turn immediately. Lily was hunched over, struggling to breathe between spasms. "Where's the key to that chain?" Robert demanded. Jim hesitated for a moment before pulling a small key from his pocket. Robert snatched it from his hands and knelt again beside the girl. "It's all right, Lily," he said softly, working to open the rusty padlock. "You're getting out of here now." When the chain finally came loose. Robert saw the true extent of the injuries on the girl's ankle. It was infected, red and swollen. She needed medical attention immediately. Something inside Robert completely broke at that moment. Without thinking, without caring about the consequences, he turned and punched Jim in the face with all the strength he possessed. The punch connected with a dry sound that echoed through the yard. Jim staggered backward, his hand flying up to cover his now profusely bleeding nose. For a moment there was only silence, except for Lily's muffled sobs and Robert's heavy breathing. "You hit me!" Jim cried, his voice distorted by the hand covering his face. "You assaulted me on my own property!" Robert looked at his own fists, still clenched, and felt a mixture of shock and satisfaction. In 52 years of life, he had never hit anyone. He had always resolved conflicts with words, negotiation, economic pressure. But seeing that child chained had awakened something primitive in his soul, a protective instinct that knew no bounds. "And I'd do it again," he said, his voice calmer now but still laden with threat. Over and over. Jim recoiled a few more steps, his eyes alternating between Robert and the road, as if calculating his chances of escape. "You're crazy, completely insane. I'll call the police. I'll sue you for assault." "Call them," Robert replied, carefully helping Lily to her feet. The girl was trembling violently, whether from fear, cold, or fever, he couldn't determine. "Call the police and explain why you had a child chained up with pigs." Jim's face visibly paled. His initial bravado began to crumble as the reality of his situation became clear. He knew, just as Robert knew, that there was no justification in the world that could explain that scene to the authorities. She's a trespasser," Jim mumbled, but his voice had lost all conviction. "Had no right to be here." "A hungry 6-year-old child," Robert retorted, picking Lily up carefully. She was alarmingly light, her bones prominent beneath her pale skin. A child who asked for help and was treated worse than an animal. Lily nestled against Robert's chest, her small hand clutching his shirt as if it were a lifeline. He could feel the heat of her fever through her dirty clothes, and the tremor that ran through her fragile body. "Where's your grandmother, Lily?" he asked softly. "At home," she replied in a weak voice. "She was too tired, couldn't get out of bed." Robert looked around the property, searching for signs of other dwellings. "Where is your home?" Lily pointed vaguely beyond the fields. "Far away. You have to walk a lot." Jim spat blood on the ground and wiped his face with his shirt sleeve. "They live in a rundown shack on the other side of the property," he said with disdain. "Trespassers. Showed up a few months ago and set up there without permission. And instead of helping, you chained up a sick child." Robert shook his head, his voice heavy with disgust. "What kind of man have you become, Jim?" "The kind who doesn't have money to support trespassers," Jim exploded, his frustration and despair finally surfacing. "You think it's easy? You with your millions, your imported cars, your prosperous farms, you have no idea what it's like to fight to survive." Robert observed the man before him, dirty, desperate, blood drying on his face, and for a moment felt something akin to pity. But then Lily coughed again, a sound that cut through any compassion he might feel. "My financial situation wouldn't give me the right to torture innocent children," he said coldly, "and neither would yours." He began to walk toward his car, Lily still in his arms. Each step seemed to trigger a new cough from the girl, and he could feel the fever intensifying. "Where are you going?" Jim shouted behind him. Robert stopped and turned. "I'm taking her to the hospital, and then I'm going to check on her grandmother." "And what about my rent?" The question came out desperate, almost pathetic. Robert looked at the man he had just minutes ago considered merely a delinquent tenant. Now he saw something much worse, a man who had lost his basic humanity. "Your rent?" he repeated, his voice filled with incredulity. "Jim, after what I saw here today, you have 1 week to vacate this property." "You can't do that," Jim protested, running after him. "I have rights. I have a contract." Robert opened the back door of the Mercedes and carefully settled Lily into the seat, adjusting the air conditioning to a milder temperature. "You had rights," he corrected, "but you lost all of them the moment you decided to chain a hungry child." He was about to get in the car when Jim made one last desperate attempt. "And what good does it do to free this girl? Are you actually going to help her?" The question struck Robert like a sharp arrow. He paused, one hand on the car door, the other still gently touching Lily's shoulder. It was a simple question, but it carried enormous implications. What did he really intend to do? Take the girl to the hospital and then simply return to his normal life? He looked in the rearview mirror at Lily, who had closed her eyes but was still breathing irregularly. Then he looked at Jim, who awaited an answer with a cruel smile on his lips, as if he knew he had touched a vulnerable point. For a terrible moment, Robert didn't know what to say. Robert got into the car without answering Jim's question, but the words echoed in his mind like a relentless hammer. For the first few miles on the dusty road, he drove on automatic pilot, his turbulent mind grappling with a reality he hadn't fully considered. Lily was asleep in the back seat, her irregular breathing the only sound apart from the soft hum of the engine. In the rearview mirror, he watched the girl's pale face, her parched lips, the dirt marks that not even her tears had completely washed away. A terrifying question began to form. What now? His entire life had been built on meticulous planning, calculated decisions, and predictable outcomes. He knew how to negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts, how to expand properties, how to maximize our profits. But how did you care for a sick and seemingly abandoned child? How did you navigate the bureaucratic labyrinth of social services? How did you explain to his own family that his morning of collecting rent had turned into something completely different? Riverside General Hospital was 40 minutes away. Robert sped up a little, torn between the urgency of getting Lily medical help and the growing anxiety about the implications of his actions. When he stopped at the city's first traffic light, he picked up his cell phone and hesitated. Should he call someone? Who? His ex-wife? His daughter? His lawyer? He decided the answers could wait. Lily couldn't. The hospital's pediatric emergency room was an environment Robert had never frequented. The corridors smelled of disinfectant and anxiety, populated by worried parents and crying children. When he arrived at the reception desk, carrying Lily, the receptionist looked up with a tired efficiency that quickly turned into alarm. "My God, what happened to her?" she asked, already grabbing forms. "She was in terrible condition," Robert replied, choosing his words carefully. "She has a high fever, a persistent cough, and injuries on her ankle that look infected." A nurse arrived quickly and, after an initial assessment, took Lily to an emergency room. Robert was left in the waiting room with a stack of forms that seemed to be written in a foreign language. Child's full name, Lily. Last name, he didn't know. Address, a shack somewhere on Jim's farm. Legal guardian, a grandmother in a coma. "Sir?" The voice of the social worker pulled him from his thoughts. She was a middle-aged woman with glasses and an expression that blended professional competence with thinly disguised suspicion. "I'm Carla Hayes, a social worker here at the hospital. I need to ask you some questions about the girl you brought in." Robert swallowed hard. He knew this moment would come, but he didn't feel prepared. "Of course. What is your relationship with Lily?" The simple question left him speechless for a moment. I don't have a formal relationship with her. I found her in difficult circumstances and brought her here." Carla made notes on her clipboard. "Where exactly did you find her?" Robert closed his eyes briefly, reliving the scene in the pigsty. On a farmer's property, she was being kept in improper conditions. Improper how? Chained. The word came out as a whisper. Carla stopped writing and looked him directly in the eyes. "Sir, are you telling me you found a child chained?" "Yes." Robert found his voice again. "In a farm's pigsty with the pigs." The silence that followed was heavy. Carla looked at her forms, then back at Robert, clearly processing the legal implications of what she had heard. "Sir, this constitutes severe child abuse. We need to involve the police immediately." "I understand," Robert said, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Do whatever is necessary." And her family, parents, guardians. "There's a grandmother, but according to Lily, she was very ill. Couldn't get out of bed." Carla made more notes. "Where?" Robert described the approximate location Lily had indicated. As he spoke, he realized his words were sealing something irreversible. There was no turning back. He had become part of this situation, whether he wanted to or not. "Mr. Miller," the nurse had returned. "The girl is stable for now, but we need to run some tests. She has pneumonia and moderate malnutrition. The injuries on her ankle are infected and will need antibiotics." "Will she be all right?" Robert asked, surprised by the intensity of his own concern. "With proper treatment, yes, but she'll need to stay hospitalized for a few days." Carla addressed. "The nurse will need to document everything completely. The circumstances in which she was found constitute child abuse." Robert watched the two professionals discuss protocols and procedures, notifying authorities and protective measures. He was beginning to understand that he had triggered a bureaucratic machine that would now follow its own course, regardless of his intentions or conveniences. His cell phone rang. It was an unrecognized number. "Robert Miller," he answered. "Mr. Miller." The voice was harsh, less arrogant, more desperate. "It was Jim. We need to talk, urgent." "We have nothing to talk about, Jim." "Yes, we do. You don't understand the whole situation. This girl, this grandmother. There are things you don't know, things that will complicate your life a lot if you keep meddling." Robert looked out. The waiting room window, seeing normal families dealing with normal medical emergencies. His morning had started with a simple rent collection. Now he was in the hospital, involved with social workers and veiled threats. "What kind of things, Jim?" "Not over the phone. Meet me in an hour at the Rusty Spoke at the edge of town. If you really want to help this girl, you need to know the whole truth." The call ended, leaving Robert with more questions than answers, and the growing feeling that he was about to discover the situation was far more complicated than he had imagined. The Rusty Spoke was the kind of establishment Robert would normally avoid. A humble dive bar at the edge of town, with plastic tables and an old television hanging in the corner. The smell of grease and cigarette smoke permeated the stuffy air. When he arrived, Jim was already there, sitting at a back table with a half-empty glass of cheap whiskey in front of him. The farmer seemed to have aged years in the last few hours. His nose was swollen and bruised where Robert had punched him, but it was more than that. There was a desperation in his eyes that went beyond physical pain. "You came," Jim said as Robert approached. "I have 5 minutes," Robert replied, remaining standing. "Spit it out." Jim gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down, please. This is going to take more than 5 minutes." Against his better judgment, Robert sat. The waiter approached, but he waved away any drinks with a brusque gesture. "You need to understand," Jim began, his words tumbling out, "that I'm not a monster. I know that's what you think now, and I can't blame you. But the situation is much more complicated than it seems. Nothing justifies chaining a child." "You're right, nothing justifies it." Jim took a gulp of the whiskey with trembling hands. "But you need to know that that girl and her grandmother aren't just innocent trespassers who showed up on my property. Robert crossed his arms, his patience already wearing thin. Then explain. Her grandmother Martha, she had a relationship with my father, a relationship that lasted years even after he married my mother. The revelation hit Robert like a gut punch. What are you saying? I'm saying that Lily might be my half-sister. Jim looked directly at Robert. My father, Anthony, died 2 years ago and left huge debts that weren't just from the bank, if you know what I mean. Robert felt a cold dread in his stomach. What kind of debts? The kind that don't appear in official documents, the kind that dangerous people collect in ways you don't want to imagine. Jim ran a hand through his dirty hair. When Martha showed up on the property with the girl 3 months ago, claiming my father had promised to take care of them, I thought it was just another attempt to get money. And you kicked her out? I tried, but she insisted, said she had. Letters, written promises, and the more she talked, the more I realized it might be true. Jim took another gulp. The problem is, I was being pressured by my father's creditors. They think he hid money before he died. Robert began to see where the story was going, and he didn't like it one bit. And they think Martha knows something. Exactly. Over the past 2 months, they started showing up on the property, asking questions, threatening. I said I didn't know anything about Martha and the girl, but they didn't believe me. And your solution was to chain a child. Jim lowered his head. In the last few days, the pressure escalated. They said if I didn't hand over the money by the end of the week, they'd solve the problem another way. When I caught Lily trying to steal the chicken, I panicked. I thought if they saw her being punished, they'd believe I wasn't protecting anyone. Robert felt nauseous. You used a child as a shield. I know how it sounds. Jim exploded, then lowered his voice as he realized other people in the bar were looking. I know it was horrible, but you don't understand the pressure. These men, they're not like bank collectors. They kill, Robert. They kill entire families. And now? Robert asked, though he already knew he didn't want to hear the answer. Now you've gotten yourself involved in this. You took the girl, took her to the hospital. They'll know, and they'll want answers. Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping on the floor. Are you telling me I put Lily in danger by trying to save her? I'm telling you that you need to. Be very careful now. These men won't simply give up because a child is in the hospital. If they believe she or her grandmother know where my father's money is, they'll go after them wherever they are. Robert looked at the phone. He needed to go back to the hospital, check on Lily, talk to the social worker about additional protection. But first, he needed to fully understand what kind of situation he had gotten himself into. How much money are we talking about? Jim laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. $200,000 plus interest. Robert quickly did the math. It was a substantial sum, but not impossible for someone in his position. And if I pay the debt, you'd do that? I'm asking if it would solve the problem. Jim looked at him with an expression that mixed hope and disbelief. It would solve their problem with me, but I don't know if it would solve their problem with Martha and Lily. If they really believe they know something, then it's not just a matter of money. No, it's a matter of honor. And people like Barrett don't forget when someone makes them waste time. Robert looked out the dirty window of the bar, seeing the normal movement of the small town, people living their simple, safe lives. 24 hours ago, that was his reality too. I need to go, he said, heading for the door. Robert, Jim shouted behind him, be careful, very careful. And if you really want to protect that girl, maybe it's best to let social services handle her. Staying away might be the safest thing you can do. Robert stopped at the door without turning. For whom? Her or me? Jim didn't answer. and Robert left the bar with the terrible certainty that he had asked the wrong question. Robert drove back to the hospital with his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Barrett's threat echoed in his mind. "I'll go after your family." His first stop was the hospital, where he found Lily awake, trying to eat some soup the nurse had brought her. "Uncle Bob!" she cried when she saw him, a word that struck him like a bolt of lightning. No one had called him uncle in years. "Hi, little one," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "How are you feeling?" "Better. The doctor said I can leave tomorrow." Lily hesitated. "But I don't know where I'm going to stay." Robert sat in the chair beside the bed. "About that, we found out some things about your family." He told her, carefully and age-appropriately, about Anthony's letters and the confirmation that he was her father. Lily listened in silence, her big eyes filling with tears. "So Jim is my brother?" she asked in a small voice. "Half-brother, yes. But he hurt me." Robert took her small hand. "He did some very wrong things, Lily. But sometimes people do bad things when they're scared or angry. It doesn't make what he did right, but he's trying to make amends." "What's make amends?" "It's when someone tries to fix the mistakes they've made." Lily thought for a moment. "And Grandma, is she going to be okay?" "The doctors are taking very good care of her. It will take time, but she will get better." Robert left Lily's room with a heavy heart and headed to the room where Martha was being treated. The elderly woman was conscious now, though very weak. When she saw him enter, her eyes filled with recognition and gratitude. "You're the man who saved my granddaughter," she said in a hoarse voice. "I'm Robert. How are you feeling?" "Weak but alive. That's more than I expected." Martha tried to sit up. "The girl, is she all right?" "She's recovering." "Martha, I need to talk to you about Anthony Peterson." The woman's face immediately hardened. "Why?" Robert told her about the loan sharks, about the threats, about Barrett's claims that there were other investments. Martha listened in silence, occasionally closing her eyes as if reliving something painful. "Anthony was a complicated man," she said finally. "He had dealings I'd rather not know about. But he loved Lily. That I know for sure." "Barrett believes you know about properties or documents Anthony left behind." Martha laughed bitterly. "If I knew, do you think I'd be living in a shack with my granddaughter starving?" "So there's nothing else?" "There is one thing." Martha hesitated. "Anthony gave me a key 2 years ago. Said it was for a safety deposit box at a bank in Midland City, but he never told me which bank or what was inside." Robert felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Do you still have that key?" "I did. Kept it in a cookie tin hidden in the shack." Robert's heart sank. The shack was burned down. By whom? Robert didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to add more trauma to Martha's experience. By someone who wanted to erase evidence. Martha closed her eyes. "So everything's lost." Robert left the hospital with more questions than answers. He drove to his office, where he began to make the necessary financial calculations. $500,000 would mean liquidating investments, mortgaging properties, using resources he had planned for other purposes, but it was possible. Robert arrived at Jim's property as the sun was just beginning to rise. The place looked different in the golden morning light, less threatening, more melancholic. The old barn was about 200 yards from the main house, a wooden structure that clearly hadn't been used in years. Robert didn't expect to find Jim there, sitting on a pile of old hay with a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey beside him. He came," Jim said, his voice slurred with alcohol and exhaustion. "I didn't sleep all night thinking about this situation," Robert replied, keeping his distance. "Barrett called me." Jim laughed bitterly. "So you already know there's no turning back. That's why I'm here. The letter mentions something hidden in this barn." "I know." Jim took a gulp of the whiskey. "I spent all night looking, third plank from the left corner." Robert looked where Jim pointed. Several floorboards were loose, clearly recently removed. And I found it." Jim gestured to a metal box beside him. $250,000, exactly enough to pay Barrett and still have a little left over. Robert approached slowly. The box was open, revealing stacks of money carefully organized and wrapped in plastic. "So why didn't you just take the money and solve everything?" "Because it's not mine," Jim said, his words coming out slow but clear. "As much as I've done horrible things, as much as I've become a monster, this money belongs to the girl. It's hers and Martha's." The admission hit Robert like a punch. He had expected to find a desperate man trying to save his own skin, not someone grappling with his own conscience. "Jim, no." Jim raised his hand. "Let me finish. My father was a complicated man, but he loved that girl. More than he ever showed he loved me, and I was so angry, so resentful, that I channeled it all into her. An innocent child paid for my hatred of my own father." Robert sat on a nearby pile of hay. "What do you plan to do?" "Barrett will be here at noon. I'm going to give him the money and explain that there's nothing else. That Martha and Lily don't know anything else because there's nothing else to know." "And you think he'll accept that?" Jim shrugged. "Probably not, but at least Lily will be safe in the hospital far from here." Robert looked at the man he had 24 hours earlier considered a monster beyond redemption. There was something deeply human about Jim at that moment, a broken man trying to do the right thing for the first time in a long time. "There's another option," Robert said slowly. "What?" "We don't give the money to Barrett. We use it to get Lily and Martha out of here. For good." Jim looked at him with incredulity. "Robert, you don't understand. These men don't give up. They'll come after you, your family, everything you love until they get what they want. Then we make them not want it anymore." "How?" Robert stood up and began to walk around the barn, his mind working quickly. "Barrett wants the money Anthony owed, right? $200,000? $200,000 plus interest, probably about $230,000 now. What if we offer him something better?" Jim frowned. "Better how?" Robert stopped walking and looked directly at Jim. "You said your property is worth what, $400,000? More or less, but I owe the bank, I owe other creditors. What if I buy your property for the full value, $400,000 cash? You pay Barrett, clear your other debts, and still have something left to start over somewhere else." Jim was silent for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" "Because then Lily and Martha will have a safe place to live, because you'll have a second chance, and because men like Barrett only understand one language: money." "Robert, this is insane. You're talking about spending $400,000 to solve the problem of people you didn't even know 2 days ago." Robert looked out the dirty barn window, seeing the house where Lily had been held captive, the pigsty where he had found her chained. 2 days ago, I was a man who measured success only by the size of his bank account. Today I discovered that there's something more important than money. Sleeping at night knowing I did the right thing. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted the conversation. They were 2 black pickup trucks, raising clouds of dust on the road. Robert felt his stomach clench. "They arrived early," Jim murmured, quickly hiding the money box behind some planks. "How many men?" "Barrett never travels alone, probably 4 or 5. Robert reached for his cell phone, but Jim grabbed his arm. "Don't call the police. That will only make things worse for all of us." "Then what do we do?" Jim stood up, putting away the whiskey bottle. "We do what we came here to do. We negotiate." The vehicle stopped in front of the barn. Robert saw men getting out, types who clearly weren't local farmers. Dark clothes, dark sunglasses, calculated movements of those accustomed to intimidating. A tall man, about 50, with a graying beard and a scar on his neck, approached. Robert knew immediately it was Barrett. "Jim," the man said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "And you must be the famous Robert Miller." Robert stepped forward. "I came to settle this once and for all." Barrett smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. "Good, because so did I." Barrett walked through the barn with the confidence of a predator inspecting his territory. His three companions positioned themselves strategically. One at the door, another near the window, the third flanking Robert and Jim. These were not men accustomed to negotiating. They were men accustomed to taking. "Nice place," Barrett said, running his hand over the old wooden beams. "Anthony used to come here when he wanted to talk serious business. Said it was the quietest place on the property." He stopped and looked directly at Robert. "Nobody here screams out here." Robert kept his voice firm despite the fear he felt. "I came to propose a deal that will benefit everyone." "Deal?" Barrett laughed. "Mr. Miller, I don't think you understand your position. Here, you're not in a position to propose anything. You're here to hand over what's mine." "The money Anthony owed is here," Jim interjected, his voice firmer than Robert expected. $250,000, more than enough to settle the debt. Barrett turned slowly to Jim. "Ah, so you finally found it. Took you long enough, but you found it." "How did you know I was looking?" "Jim, my friend, do you think I got this far by being careless? I have eyes and ears all over this region. I knew you were desperately looking for something to pay me." Barrett gestured to his men. "Where's the money?" Robert stepped forward. "Before I show you anything, I need guarantees." "Guarantees?" Barrett's voice took on a dangerous tone. "What kind of guarantees?" "That after you receive the money, you and your men will leave and never bother Lily, Martha, or anyone else related to this property again." Barrett studied Robert for a long moment. "Interesting. A rich businessman worrying about some slum kid. Why?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that we have the money and you have what you want." "No, no, no." Barrett wagged a finger. "You have part of what I want. Anthony owed me $200,000 when he died, but over the last 2 years, with interest and, let's say, administrative fees, the debt has grown to $300,000. Robert felt the ground move under his feet. $300,000? And climbing every day. Barrett smiled. "So even if you hand over the $250,000 you found, you still owe me 50 grand. "That's extortion," Robert said. "That's business." Barrett moved closer. "And speaking of business, I found out some very interesting things about you, Mr. Miller. Successful businessman, multiple properties, generous bank account, 50 grand must be pocket change for someone like you." Robert realized he had been researched, investigated. Barrett hadn't come there unprepared. "And if I pay the 50 grand, does that solve everything?" "For Anthony's debt?" "Yes." Barrett paused dramatically. "But now we have a new situation. You got involved in my business. You took the old woman and the girl off the property without permission. That caused me inconvenience." Jim took a step forward. "Barrett, they don't know anything else. The money that was hidden is all there was." "Are you sure?" Barrett turned to Jim with a cruel smile. "Because I received information that Anthony had other investments in the region and that Martha knows where they are." Robert felt a wave of despair. "What other investments?" "Small properties, discreet businesses." "Anthony was smarter than you think." Barrett walked to the window. "The old woman must know where the documents are, the deeds. They could be worth much more than that paltry $250,000. "Martha is in a coma in the hospital," Robert said. "She can't answer anything. Ah, but she can wake up, and when she does, I'll be there to ask the right questions. The threat was clear and terrible. Robert understood that handing over the money wouldn't solve anything. Barrett had discovered that there was potentially much more at stake, and he wouldn't stop until he got everything. How much do you want? Robert asked directly. Now you're speaking my language. Barrett turned, his eyes gleaming. $500,000, cash, and full access to the old woman when she wakes up. $500,000 is absurd. It's the price of peace, Mr. Miller. $500,000. And I guarantee that neither you nor the girl, nor the old woman, nor anyone related to you will be bothered again. Robert looked at Jim, who was visibly shaken. The amount was astronomical, far beyond the resources found in the barn. But there was something in Barrett's expression that said there was no room for negotiation. I need time to raise this money. How much time? Robert quickly calculated, liquidating investments, transferring funds, organizing a sum of that magnitude. 1 week, 3 days, 5 days, Barrett considered. 5 days, but with conditions. The old woman stays under my surveillance at the hospital, and the girl too. No. The word came out of Robert with more force than he imagined he possessed. The conditions are, I have 5 days to get the money, but Lily and Martha remain safe, unsupervised, without threats. And how do I know you won't just flee with them? Robert took out his wallet and showed his identification. Because you know where to find me. Because I have a life, businesses, properties here. I can't just disappear. Barrett studied the documents for a moment. Smart. And you, Jim? Where do you fit into all this? Jim looked at Robert, then at Barrett. I stay here, ensuring nothing moves until you get your money, like a willing hostage, like a man paying for his mistakes. Barrett smiled for the first time genuinely. I like that, personal responsibility. He headed for the door. 5 days, Mr. Miller, $500,000, and if you try any tricks, any clever moves, I won't go after your money. I'll go after your family. The threat chilled Robert's blood. My family has nothing to do with this. Now they do, because you decided to meddle where you shouldn't have. Barrett stopped at the door. 5 days. Don't be late. When the cars drove away, Robert sat heavily on a pile of hay. $500,000. It was a fortune, even for someone in his position. And now his own family was being threatened. Robert, Jim said softly, you don't have to do this. Robert looked at the man who had started as his delinquent tenant and now had become something akin to an ally. Yes, I do, because if I don't, Lily will grow up knowing. I abandoned her when she needed me most, and if Barrett doesn't keep his word, Robert stood up, his determination crystallizing, then we'll have to make sure he does. Robert drove back to town with his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Barrett's threat echoed in his mind. I'll go after your family. His first stop was the hospital, where he found Lily awake, trying to eat some soup the nurse had brought her. Uncle Bob, she cried when she saw him, a word that struck him like a bolt of lightning. No one had called him uncle in years. Hi, little one, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. How are you feeling? Better. The doctor said I can leave tomorrow. Lily hesitated. But I don't know where I'm going to stay. Robert sat in the chair beside the bed. About that, we found out some things about your family. He told her, carefully and age-appropriately, about Anthony's letters and the confirmation that he was her father. Lily listened in silence, her big eyes filling with tears. So Jim is my brother, she asked in a small voice. Half-brother, yes, but he hurt me. Robert took her small hand. He did some very wrong things, Lily, but sometimes people do bad. and things when they're scared or angry. It doesn't make what he did right, but he's trying to make amends. What's make amends? It's when someone tries to fix the mistakes they've made. Lily thought for a moment. And Grandma, is she going to be okay? The doctors are taking very good care of her. It will take time, but she will get better. Robert left Lily's room with a heavy heart and headed to the room where Martha was being treated. The elderly woman was conscious now, though very weak. When she saw him enter, her eyes filled with recognition and gratitude. "You're the man who saved my granddaughter," she said in a hoarse voice. "I'm Robert. How are you feeling?" "Weak, but alive. That's more than I expected." Martha tried to sit up. "The girl. Is she all right?" "She's recovering." "Martha, I need to talk to you about Anthony Peterson." The woman's face immediately hardened. "Why?" Robert told her about the loan sharks, about the threats, about Barrett's claims that there were other investments. Martha listened in silence, occasionally closing her eyes as if reliving something painful. "Anthony was a complicated man," she said finally. "He had dealings I'd rather not know about. But he loved Lily. That I know for sure." "Barrett believes. You know about properties or documents Anthony left behind?" Martha laughed bitterly. "If I knew, do you think I'd be living in a shack with my granddaughter starving?" "So, there's nothing else?" "There is one thing." Martha hesitated. "Anthony gave me a key 2 years ago, said it was for a safety deposit box at a bank in Midland City, but he never told me which bank or what was inside." Robert felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Do you still have that key?" "I did. Kept it in a cookie tin, hidden in the shack." Robert's heart sank. "The shack was burned down." "By whom?" Robert didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to add more trauma to Martha's experience. "By someone who wanted to erase evidence." Martha closed her eyes. "So everything's lost." Robert left the hospital with more questions than answers. He drove to his office, where he began to make the necessary financial calculations. $500,000 would mean liquidating investments, mortgaging properties, using resources he had planned for other purposes. But it was possible. What worried him most was the threat to his family. He called his daughter in New York City. "Dad," Fernanda answered on the third ring. "What a surprise! You never call in the middle of the week." "Fernanda, I need you to be very careful these next few days." "Careful how?" Robert struggled to find words that wouldn't cause panic. "I'm involved in a delicate situation here. There might be people trying to use you to pressure me." "Dad, you're scaring me. What kind of situation?" "I'm helping a child in a very difficult spot. Some people aren't happy about my interference." There was silence on the other end. "Dad, this sounds dangerous. That's why I need you to stay alert. Don't go places alone. Vary your routes. Always let someone know where you are." "Do you want me to come there?" Robert considered. Part of him wanted Fernanda close by, where he could protect her. Another part knew it was safer for her to stay away. "For now, stay in New York City, but keep in daily contact with me." After the call, Robert sat in his leather armchair and looked out his office window. His life had become unrecognizable in less than 48 hours. He was a man accustomed to control, to predictability. Now he was navigating completely unknown waters. His phone rang. It was a local number he didn't recognize. Robert Miller. "Mr. Miller, this is Carla from the hospital. We have a situation." Robert's stomach clenched. What kind of situation? "Someone tried to get into Lily's room an hour ago. A man claimed to be a relative, but when security asked for identification, he fled." "Did you get a description?" "White male, about 40, dark clothes." But Mr. Miller, there's one more thing. We found this at the entrance to Martha's room. Robert closed his eyes. What did you find? A note. It just says, 3 days left. She knows more than she's telling. Barrett wasn't waiting the agreed upon 5 days. He was applying pressure immediately, testing defenses, sending a clear message that his threats were real. Robert made a decision he knew was risky, but necessary. Carla, I need to transfer Lily and Martha to another hospital, today. Mr. Miller, they still need care. I'll arrange for private care. The important thing is to get them out of there, before anyone tries again. This is highly irregular. Carla, these people's lives are in danger. I'll take full responsibility, but I need to move them now. 2 hours later, Robert had arranged a private ambulance and transferred Lily and Martha to a private clinic in a neighboring town, registering them under false names. It was an expensive and complicated operation, but necessary. When he finally returned home that night, he found a surprise waiting. Jim was sitting on his porch. How did you get here? Robert asked. Walked, then hitched a ride. Jim looked exhausted. We need to talk. About what? About what Barrett didn't tell you, about why he really wants so much money. Jim looked directly at Robert. And about what happens after you pay. Robert felt a chill down his spine. What do you mean? I mean that paying $500,000 isn't going to solve our problem. It's just going to make it much, much bigger. Robert led Jim inside, offering him a cup of coffee. The man seemed to have aged years since the morning. His hands trembled slightly, and there was an urgency in his eyes that Robert had never seen before. Speak, Robert said, sitting at the kitchen table. Jim took a gulp of coffee. Before beginning, Barrett isn't just a common loan shark, Robert. He's much worse. And what he didn't tell you is that my father didn't owe him money for loans. Then why? Because my father discovered something he shouldn't have discovered. Jim looked out the window as if fearing being watched. Barrett runs a money laundering network that spans 3 states. Rural properties bought with dirty money, then sold clean. My father stumbled upon this operation by accident. Robert felt a shiver. How? 3 years ago, Barrett approached my father offering a seemingly legitimate deal. He wanted to buy unproductive land for above-market prices. My father, always greedy, agreed to sell a portion of the property. And then? Then my father started noticing strange things. Money coming from accounts that didn't match the official buyers, forged documents, people who were supposedly the legal owners, but who never appeared on the properties. Robert began to understand the dimension of the problem. Your father found out he was helping to launder money. Worse, he found out that several properties in the region were being used for it, and that some local farmers were being forced to participate, whether they wanted to or not. And when he confronted Barrett? Jim laughed bitterly. My father didn't confront. He tried to blackmail him. The revelation hit Robert like a lightning bolt. Blackmail? He documented everything he could and tried to make Barrett pay to keep quiet. The $200,000 wasn't a debt, Robert. It was blackmail payment. Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping on the floor. So your father was extorting Barrett? For 2 years, until Barrett got tired and decided it would be easier to eliminate the problem. Eliminate how? Jim looked directly at Robert. My father didn't die of natural causes. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. Are you saying Barrett killed your father? I'm saying my father died very conveniently for Barrett. Sudden heart attack. No history of heart problems. No autopsy because there were no suspicions. Why didn't you say this before? Because I wasn't sure. Because I was so scared and angry I couldn't think straight. Jim slammed his fist on the table. And because a part of me thought my father deserved what happened. Robert walked to the window, trying to process the information. If that's true, paying $500,000 to Barrett will make you the next problem to be eliminated, Jim completed. Because now you know too much. You have access to Martha, who might know where my father hid evidence. You've become a threat. What evidence? My father was paranoid. He always said that if something happened to him, there were documents kept in a safe place that would bring down important people. I always thought it was just bluster, but now, Robert turned. The key Martha mentioned, the safety deposit box at the bank. Probably. And if Barrett suspects it exists, he'll never stop looking. Robert finished the thought. Even if I pay the $500,000. Exactly. In fact, paying will confirm to him that you have enough resources to be a bigger problem. Robert sat down again, his mind working furiously. So our options are run or fight. Run where? You yourself said his operation spans 3 states. Jim nodded. And he has contacts with local law enforcement. That's why he was never investigated. Robert picked up his phone. Then we take this to someone who can really do something. Who? The FBI. If it's multi-state money laundering, it's federal jurisdiction. Jim shook his head. Robert, you don't have evidence. It's just the word of a drunk, indebted man against a respected businessman. Barrett is careful. He has legal fronts for everything. Then we get evidence. How? Robert looked at Jim for a long moment. Martha said your father kept a safety deposit box key. If we can find out which bank, which box. It's impossible. There are dozens of banks in Midland City. Not if we use the right technology. Robert picked up his laptop. I can hire private investigators, people specialized in tracking bank accounts. That will cost a fortune. Less than $500,000, and less than our lives. Jim was silent for a moment. Robert, there's something else. What now? Martha might be pretending not to remember everything. Robert looked at him with incredulity. Why? Because she's smarter than she looks. When she and Lily showed up on the property, she wasn't looking for charity. She was looking for something specific. How? Do you know? Daridi, because I caught her several times wandering around the property at night when she thought I was sleeping. She was looking for something. Robert felt a new wave of complications approaching. Looking for what? I don't know, but she knew the property very well for someone who supposedly had only visited a few times. Do you think she knows about the money laundering operation? I think she knows a lot more than she's telling everyone, including you. Robert looked at the clock. It was almost 10 at night. In less than 3 days, Barrett would expect his money, and now he discovered that perhaps neither Martha nor Barrett were completely honest about their motivations. Jim, I need to ask you a difficult question. What? In this whole story, is there anyone I can truly trust? Jim thought for a long moment before answering. Lily, a 6-year-old child is the only person in this whole situation who doesn't have a hidden agenda. Robert looked at his phone, thinking of the girl who was now hidden in a private clinic under a false name. A child who had called him Uncle Bob and who represented the only pure thing amidst all that corruption and violence. Then it's for her that we'll fight, he said finally. Against Barrett? Against people who kill for much less? Robert stood up, a cold determination settling in his chest. Jim, 48 hours ago I was a businessman who only cared about profits and properties. Now I've discovered there are things more important than money, and I'll do anything to protect Lily, even if it means destroying your own life. Robert looked out the window at the darkness outside, where he knew invisible dangers waited. My life was already destroyed the moment I saw that girl chained up. Now, I'm just deciding what to build in its place. Robert didn't sleep that night. He spent hours working on his laptop, researching private investigators, FBI field officers, and trying to form a plan that wouldn't end with all of them dead. Jim fell asleep on the couch around 3 in the morning, physically and emotionally exhausted. At 6 in the morning, Robert was ready. He had hired a private investigator from New York City specializing in financial crimes and arranged a meeting with a federal agent in Midland City. He had also done something he knew was risky, transferred $2 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "Why did you do that?" Jim asked when Robert explained his morning actions. "Because if something happens to me, I want Lily to have resources to start a new life anywhere in the world." "Robert, you're thinking as if we've already lost." "I'm thinking like someone who understands we're fighting very powerful people." Robert poured them both coffee. "But I'm also thinking like someone who isn't going to give up." The phone rang. It was the private investigator, Paul. "Mr. Miller, I've already started working with the information you gave me. I have good news and bad news." "Start with the bad." "Tracking bank accounts without specific numbers or more details is almost impossible. Even with advanced technology, we'd need warrants that would take weeks to get." Robert felt his stomach sink. "And the good news? I found something interesting about Barrett. He has several shell companies, but they were all opened in the last 5 years. Before that, nothing. It's like he didn't exist." "What does that mean?" That Barrett probably isn't even his real name, and that gave me an idea." Robert leaned forward. "What idea?" "If he's using a false identity, he might have made slips in earlier documents. Slips I can track, but I'll need more time." "How much time?" "About 2 days." Robert looked at Jim. "We don't have 2 days." "Then maybe it's time to try the other approach," Paul said. "Provoke Barrett into making a mistake." "How?" "By pretending you have evidence you don't. Forcing him to act rashly." Robert hung up and turned to Jim. "It's a crazy idea, but it might work. Or it might kill us faster." "Jim, there's something I need to ask you. Do you really want to make amends for what you did to Lily?" Jim looked at his hands. "More than anything. Then I need you to do something that could be very dangerous." "What?" "I need you to call Barrett and tell him Martha woke up and revealed the location of the safety deposit box." Jim paled. "Robert, that's suicide." "Not if we do it right. We'll set up a meeting in a public place with lots of people around, and we'll have backup." "What backup?" Robert showed him the card he had received from the federal agent. "The FBI will be watching. If Barrett takes the bait and shows up, we'll have evidence that he's involved. And if he doesn't take the bait, then at least we buy some time." Jim was silent for a long moment. "Robert, there's something I haven't told you about my father." Robert sighed. "What now?" "Before he died, he gave me an envelope. Said to open it only if something happened to him. I never opened it." Robert stood up abruptly. "Where is that envelope?" "Buried under the chicken coop on the property." "And you didn't think to mention this before?" "I was scared," Jim exploded. "Scared of what I might find. Scared of confirming that my father really was involved with criminals. Scared of becoming the next target." Robert grabbed his car keys. "Let's go get that envelope. Now." "Robert, Barrett might be watching the property." "Then we'll be careful." The drive to the property was tense. Robert took alternative routes, constantly checking if they were being followed. When they arrived, the property seemed deserted. but there was something in the air that made them nervous. The chicken coop was behind the main house. Jim guided Robert to a specific corner and began to dig with an old shovel. After a few minutes, he hit something solid. "Here," he said, pulling out a small metal box. Inside the box was a yellowed envelope and a small key, different from the one Martha had mentioned. Robert opened the envelope. There were several photographs of documents, bank transfers, and a handwritten letter from Anthony. "If you're reading this, it's because something happened to me. Jim, my son, I made many mistakes in life, but the biggest was getting involved with dangerous people out of greed. The man who calls himself Barrett is actually Raymond Collins, a corrupt former police officer from a major city force. He runs an operation that launders drug money through rural properties. I have evidence of over 20 properties involved and names of politicians who receive bribes. It's all in the safety deposit box at the Federal Reserve Bank branch in Midland City, box number 247. This key opens that box. Use this information to protect yourself, but be careful. Barrett kills anyone who threatens his operation." Robert looked at Jim, who was reading over his shoulder. "Your father left enough evidence to bring Barrett down. Now what?" Robert picked up his phone. "Now we call the FBI and hand over everything." "Robert, look there." Robert turned and saw two black pickup trucks approaching down the road. Barrett had discovered where they were. "Run or fight?" Jim asked. Robert looked at the evidence in his hands, then at the approaching trucks. "Fight, but smartly." He grabbed his phone and called the federal agent as they ran back to the car. "Agent Silver, Robert Miller. I'm at the rural property with concrete evidence against Barrett's operation. He's arriving here now with armed men. I need immediate backup." "Exact location?" Robert gave the coordinates as they got into the car. The trucks were less than 100 yards away. 15 minutes for team arrival, the agent said. Robert looked in the rearview mirror. "We don't have 15 minutes. He started the car and sped up, but instead of fleeing down the main road, he took a trail he knew that led to the top of a hill. It was risky, but it was the only place they could buy time. "Robert, they're coming after us." "I know, but up there they'll have to come on foot. And when the FBI arrives, they'll be able to see everything." As they ascended the hill, Robert made one more call. "Paul, you need to send everything you found about Barrett to Agent Silver at the FBI, right now." "I got more info. Raymond Collins was expelled from the force 6 years ago for corruption. There's an open arrest warrant out for him in the city." "Send it all." Robert parked at the top of the hill and looked down. The trucks had stopped, and armed men were getting out. But in the distance, he could see blue lights approaching on the main road. "Jim, in a few minutes this will be over, one way or another." Jim held the evidence to his chest. "Robert, if something happens..." "Nothing's going to happen. Because now we have something Barrett didn't expect." "What?" Robert smiled for the first time in days. "The truth and FBI backup." The sound of helicopters began to echo in the valley. The FBI helicopters circled the hill like vultures, their lights cutting through the hazy morning. Robert saw Barrett, or Raymond Collins, gesturing furiously at his men, clearly realizing he had fallen into a trap. "Attention, you are surrounded!" The amplified voice came from one of the helicopters. "Drop your weapons and surrender." Robert watched through the car's rear window as the operation unfolded. Some of Barrett's men immediately dropped their weapons, but others hesitated. Barrett was shouting something Robert couldn't hear over the rotor noise. "Robert, look there!" Jim pointed to a side trail. "Barrett's trying to run." Indeed, Barrett had broken away from the group and was climbing the hill on foot, clearly trying to reach them before the police captured him. Robert felt a chill as he realized the man's intentions. "He's coming for the evidence," he murmured. "What do we do?" Robert looked around. They were at the top of the hill, nowhere to run. Barrett was climbing determinedly, a pistol in his hand. The FBI was busy arresting the other men below. "Jim, you need to get down to the police with the evidence." "And you?" "I'll buy time." "Robert, he's armed. And I have something he wants more than killing us, the evidence." Robert grabbed the envelope and got out of the car. "Go, Jim, get this to the agent. I'm not leaving you alone." Robert looked at the man who had started as his delinquent tenant and now risked his life by his side. "Jim, do you really want to make amends for what you did to Lily?" "Yes." "Then make sure this evidence reaches the police. Make sure Barrett can never hurt her or any other child again." Jim hesitated for a moment, then took the envelope and ran down the opposite trail, shouting to get the officer's attention. Barrett appeared at the top of the hill 60 seconds later, sweating and panting, but with his gun firmly aimed at Robert. "Where are the documents?" he asked without preamble. "In a safe place." "Don't play with me, Robert. My men are arrested. My operation is compromised. I have nothing left to lose." Robert took a step back, keeping his hands visible. "Raymond Collins, is that what you're really called?" Barrett smiled coldly. "So you found out. It hardly matters now." "It does matter, because now the FBI knows who you really are. They know about your expulsion from the city force. They know about the open warrants. And you think that worries me? I've always managed to escape before. But you never had physical evidence against you. Photos, documents, bank transfers. Your father documented everything, Raymond." For the first time, Robert saw real fear in Barrett's eyes. "Where are those documents?" "With the FBI?" "Lie. If they were, you wouldn't be here negotiating." Robert smiled. "Who said I was negotiating?" It was then that Jim reappeared behind Barrett, accompanied by 2 armed federal agents. "Drop the weapon!" one of the agents shouted. Barrett turned quickly, but realized he was outnumbered. For a moment that seemed eternal, Robert thought the man would resist. Then, slowly, Barrett lowered his weapon. "Raymond Collins," the agent said, "you are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, extortion, and corruption." As they handcuffed Barrett, he looked directly at Robert. "You don't know who you're messing with. I have powerful friends. I'll be out in a week." "Perhaps," Robert replied calmly. "But a week is enough time for Lily to be in a safe place, far from people like you." The mention of Lily made something break in Barrett's expression. "That damn girl. None of this would have happened if she hadn't—" "If she hadn't what?" Robert interrupted. "Tried to eat when she was hungry? Existed? Been an innocent child?" Barrett was led away without responding, but Robert saw in his eyes that the man still held Lily responsible for his downfall. Even in handcuffs, even surrounded by federal agents, he still blamed a 6-year-old child for his own criminal choices. Agent Silver approached Robert. "Mr. Miller, the evidence your friend brought us is enough to bring down an operation we've been investigating for 2 years. Dozens of properties, millions in laundered money, corrupt politicians. You two did an exceptional job." "And Barrett? Will he get out with the evidence we have? He'll be locked up for a very long time. And without the political protection he had, other criminals he harmed might want to settle scores." Robert felt a profound relief. "And the threats to my family?" "With Barrett arrested and his network dismantled, there are no more threats. You are safe." Jim approached, still trembling from the adrenaline. "Robert, you're crazy. You could have died." "But I didn't, and now Lily can grow up without fear." "Speaking of Lily," Agent Silver said, "you'll need to regularize her legal situation. With the father's death confirmed and the grandmother still recovering, Robert had already thought of that. I want to adopt her, officially. Jim looked at him in surprise. Robert, it's what I want, Jim. In the last few weeks, I discovered that my life was empty. Lily showed me what truly matters. And me? Jim asked hesitantly. She's technically my half-sister. Robert studied the man's face. Despite all the mistakes he had made, Jim had shown courage and decency when it mattered. Lily will need family. If you've truly changed, if you truly want to make amends, there's a place for you too. As a family? As people who care about her. Jim began to cry, tears of relief, regret, and hope. Robert, I don't deserve. None of us deserve anything, Jim. But Lily deserves to have people who fight for her. And that's what we're going to do. As they descended the hill, Robert called the clinic where Lily was hidden. When she answered the phone, her small voice filled his heart with joy. Uncle Bob, when are you coming to get me? I'm on my way, little one, and I have some very good news for you. What news? Robert looked at Jim, who nodded encouragingly. I'll tell you in person, but I can tell you this much. You'll never have to be afraid of anything again. Promise. Robert looked back, where the flashing lights of the FBI cars were still visible. Barrett was being taken to face justice, his criminal network dismantled. Lily was safe. I promise, Lily. I promise. 3 weeks after Barrett's arrest, Robert sat in the courthouse waiting room, more nervous than he had ever been in any business negotiation. Beside him, Lily swung her legs in a chair too big for her, wearing a blue dress Robert had bought especially for that day. Uncle Bob, are you sure you want to be my real dad? She asked for the 10th time that morning. More sure than anything. In my life, he replied, gently squeezing her small hand. Jim was across the room, speaking quietly with Martha, who had finally been discharged from the hospital. The elderly woman was still frail, but her mind was clear, and she had given her full support to the adoption. Robert, Martha had said the previous week, you saved my granddaughter from a life I couldn't give her. Anthony would be proud. The social worker Carla approached with a folder full of documents. Mr. Miller, the judge is ready for you. The process was more emotional than Robert expected. The judge, Judge Davis, was a man in his 60s who clearly took his job seriously. He asked detailed questions about Robert's plans for Lily, his financial situation, and the family support she would have. Lily, the judge said, addressing the girl directly, do you understand what's happening here today? Lily nodded solemnly. Uncle Bob is going to be my paper daddy too, not just my heart daddy. The judge smiled, the first time he had shown emotion during the entire hearing. And do you want that? I want it very much. He saved me from the pigs. From the pigs? Robert briefly explained the circumstances of how he found Lily, omitting the most traumatic details. The judge made careful notes. And Mr. Jim Peterson? What will be your role in the child's life? Jim stood up. Your Honor, I made terrible mistakes with Lily, mistakes I'll carry for the rest of my life. But if she and Robert allow me, I want to be the best uncle I can be. Lily, how do you feel about Mr. Peterson? The girl looked at Jim for a long moment. Robert held his breath, knowing that moment was crucial for Jim's redemption. He hurt. And me, Lily said finally, but Uncle Bob said sometimes people do bad things when they're sad and scared, and he said it's forgiven when the person wants to be better. Jim began to cry silently. So you forgive him? The judge asked. I forgive him, but he can't chain me up ever again. Never. Again, little one, Jim said, his voice choked. Never again. The judge struck his gavel. Considering all the exceptional circumstances of this case and the clear best interest of the child, I grant the adoption petition. Robert Miller, you are now officially the legal father of Lily Martha Miller. Robert felt tears streaming down his face as Lily jumped into his arms, shouting, "Daddy!" for the first time. At the courthouse exit, a surprise waited. Fernanda, Robert's daughter, had driven from New York City to be present. She hugged Robert and then knelt to be at Lily's height. "Hi, Lily. I'm Fernanda. Now we're sisters." Lily examined her carefully. "You're pretty. Will you teach me how to braid hair?" "I'll teach you anything you want." 2 weeks later, Robert was overseeing the renovation of Jim's old property, which had now officially become his. But instead of using it for agribusiness, he was transforming it into something completely different. Hope Haven, Martha read from the sign Jim was installing at the gate. "I like the name." "It was Lily's idea," Robert said, watching the girl play in what was once the pigsty and had now become a colorful playground. She said she wanted a place where other children could have hope. The property was being converted into a temporary home for at-risk children. There would be small cottages for families, a school, a community garden, and all the necessary resources to give vulnerable children a chance at a new beginning. Jim approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "Robert, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Why did you include me in this? After everything I did, why did you give me a second chance?" Robert looked at Lily, who was teaching other local children how to feed the chickens in the renovated chicken coop, "because Lily taught me that everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing. What if I let you down? Then you try again, and again, until you get it right." Martha joined them. "Anthony would be proud to see what you've done with the place." "Martha," Robert said, "I wanted to ask you something. You really didn't know about the money laundering operation?" The elderly woman smiled slyly. "Robert, when you live with a man for 15 years, you learn to recognize when he's involved with things he shouldn't be." "Ah, so you knew?" "I knew he was keeping secrets. That's why I insisted he leave written evidence, just in case something happened to him." "And the safety deposit box at the bank?" Martha chuckled. "There were 2 keys. One I told you I lost. In the fire, that was for a box with cash Anthony kept for emergencies. The other, the one Jim found, was for the evidence." Robert shook his head, impressed. "You orchestrated all of this." "I protected my granddaughter the only way I knew how, ensuring that when the time was right, the right people would have the necessary tools to bring justice." "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because you needed to choose to save Lily of your own free will, not through my manipulation. You needed to discover for yourself what kind of man you truly were." Robert looked around the transformed property. Where there had once been suffering, now there was hope. Where there had once been fear, now there was security. And where there had once been a chained girl, now there was a free child playing with other children, teaching them that chicken coops are for feeding chickens, not for stealing out of desperation. "Robert!" Lily shouted from the playground. "Come see what I made." She had drawn with chalk on the ground a large stick-figure family, a tall man, Robert, a small girl, her, an elderly woman, Martha, a dark-haired man, Jim, and a long-haired woman, Fernanda. "This is our family," she said proudly. Robert knelt beside the drawing. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Daddy, can I ask you a question?" "Always. If I hadn't tried to get the chicken that day, would you still have found me?" Robert pondered his daughter's profound question. "You know what I think, Lily? I think one way or another, we would have always found each other, because real family always finds its way." Lily smiled and added another drawing to the ground, a big yellow sun shining over all of them. "Now it's perfect," she said. "And Robert knew it truly was. 1 year after that first encounter in the pigsty, Robert sat on the porch of the main house at Hope Haven, watching the morning activity on the property. Children ran across the yard, their laughter echoing where before there had only been silence and suffering. There were 15 families now, all starting their lives over in safety. Lily came running, as she did every morning, to have breakfast with him. At 7 years old now, she had grown and gained weight. Her hair gleamed with health, and her eyes radiated a confidence Robert sometimes found hard to believe. "Good morning, Daddy," she said, climbing onto his lap. "Good morning, my princess. Did you sleep well?" "I dreamed of Grandma Martha. She was teaching me how to make chocolate cake." Robert smiled. Martha had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months earlier, but her presence was still felt throughout Hope Haven. She had spent her last months helping other grandmothers in the community care for orphaned grandchildren, passing on her wisdom and strength. What else happened in the dream? She said she was proud of me, and that Daddy Anthony was too. Robert felt a pang in his heart. Lily had started referring to her biological father as Daddy Anthony to differentiate him from Robert, keeping the memory of the man she never truly knew, but who had loved her enough to protect her even after death. Jim approached, carrying a toolbox. He had become the administrator of Hope Haven and was building a new playground for the younger children. "Good morning, everyone. Lily, do you want to help Uncle Jim paint the new toys today?" "Can I, Daddy?" Lily asked, excited. "Of course, but first, breakfast." Robert watched Jim walk away and felt a deep satisfaction. The man had completely transformed. He had stopped drinking, attended weekly therapy in town, and dedicated all his energy to caring for the children at Hope Haven. His redemption had not been immediate or easy, but it was genuine and lasting. Fernanda arrived with her own 3-year-old daughter, Isabella, who had become Lily's best friend. Robert smiled seeing the two running together. Fernanda had moved to a nearby house after her divorce, wanting to be closer to family. "Dad, more donations arrived from the city," Fernanda announced, "and the mayor wants to know if you'd be willing to expand the project to other properties." Robert considered the proposal. Hope Haven had become a model for the entire region. Politicians came to visit, journalists wrote reports, and other cities wanted to replicate the project. "What do you think, Lily?" he asked his daughter. "Should we help more children?" "Of course. The more happy children, the better." The simplicity of the answer made Robert laugh. At 7, Lily had already developed a natural compassion for the less fortunate, always wanting to share her toys and always worried when a new child arrived scared at Hope Haven. After breakfast, Robert took his daily walk around the property. It was a ritual that helped him process the transformations in his life. He passed the spot where the pigsty once stood, now a colorful garden with a small memorial for Martha. He passed the barn where he had found the evidence that brought down Barrett, now converted into a community library. He stopped at the renovated chicken coop where Lily was teaching a new girl who had just arrived the previous week how to feed the chickens. "You don't have to be scared," Lily said patiently. "They're gentle. And look, when you give them corn, they get happy." The new girl, who had arrived the previous week in a similar situation to what Lily had experienced, watched with fascination. "Lily," the girl said, "were you never scared of chickens?" Lily thought for a moment. "Once I tried to get a chicken because I was very hungry, but it wasn't fear, it was desperation." "And what happened?" "Bad people hurt me because of it, but good people saved me." Lily looked toward Robert. "And now I teach other children that they never need to steal food because there will always be enough food for everyone." Robert felt tears in his eyes. His daughter had transformed trauma into a mission, suffering into purpose. That afternoon, a letter arrived that Robert had been waiting for. It was from Paul, the private investigator who had helped uncover the truth about Barrett. "Robert, I thought you'd like to know that Raymond Collins was sentenced to 22 years in prison. His money laundering network was completely dismantled. More than 50 properties were recovered and sold, with the proceeds earmarked for child protection programs. Your work saved hundreds of children who don't even know you exist." Robert put the letter away and looked around. The sun was setting over Hope Haven, painting everything in golden hues. Children played freely, families dined together. Hope flourished where before there had only been despair. Lily ran up to him, as she always did at the end of the day. "Daddy, can I tell you a secret?" "Always. Sometimes I remember when I was chained with the pigs, but you know what I think when I remember?" "What, my daughter?" "I think it was necessary to go through that, to get to you. And to get here," she gestured to the entire property, "to be able to help other children." Robert picked her up, marveling at the wisdom of his 7-year-old daughter. "Lily, do you know what you taught me?" "What?" "That true wealth isn't in having many things. It's in using what we have to protect those who need it most." Lily smiled and pointed to the chicken coop. "Now the chickens just give eggs and are happy, never again to be stolen by hungry children." Robert looked at the renovated chicken coop, then at the entire transformed property, then at the daughter in his arms, who had completely changed his life. "Never again, Lily. Never again." As they walked back to the house, Lily held Robert's hand tightly. "Daddy, tomorrow can I help you take care of more children?" "Always, my daughter. Always." And Robert knew that he had found not only a daughter, but a purpose that would give meaning to the rest of his life. In the darkest places, hope had taken root, and now it blossomed forever.